A painting shines when the techniques take full advantage of the texture and the physicality of the canvas, and video games become truly special when they commit to the interactive experience completely. But this also means, logically, that adaptation, which is a transference of a work from one medium to the other, is by definition incredibly hard.
Yes,
how can you make a story which was made for one medium shine in a completely different medium?
You have to make
This
a lot of
requires loads
big,
of
a lot of changes. Okay, you can't just directly adapt it perfectly. There will always be something lost in translation. Adapting something is like an entirely different experience. Some things will be changed entirely. Some things will be omitted entirely. A lot of things will be added that weren't there before. That's a common thing. And depending on the kind of audience that they're trying to sell to with that new medium, they might change entirely your ideas of certain characters. So like a lot of Hollywood adaptations of like books or comics and stuff like that, they will like heavily change perspectives on characters to ways that they know will sell or catch attention more so than it might have in the original content. There's going to be stuff that you're going to have to lose, but sometimes it's for like the good of the new medium that they're going to, okay? But sometimes you find out that it's just near impossible to translate it into like this new adaptation and have it end well, which is an issue that we constantly have with like live action anime adaptations. It turns out when you try to take anime characters and you try to apply them to real life actors and people, you realize anime characters don't act like real fucking people. They're literally cartoon characters because they are cartoon characters. People aren't normally like candy colored hairs and like all the different kinds of like waifus speaking in high pitched voices going, "Oh, Nichan," like this isn't how real people act. Okay.
Before we can get started though, a few ground rules.
Okay.
1. Adaptation does not equal recreation.
Yep,
I'm going to
that's
say
true.
this loads more today, probably, but when judging an adaptation of any work, the level of faithfulness to the original is not an adequate measure of success. Changes will have to be made in order to account for the different mediums, and that is unavoidable. And
Yes.
whining about that because
Unavoidable,
something is different
completely.
does not really equal.
One of the things people don't really, and I didn't even really pay attention to this as much, like when I was first consuming manga, one of the things people don't understand with like why manga as a medium is different than say a light novel. Obviously you have the main difference being there are pictures for like everything, right? There's also less narration. There can still be some narration, but there's always going to be less narration. You get less of the mindset of the like main character we're being told this story from, right? The other thing though, the nature of the medium also lets you do cool stuff with like the framing of the panels themselves. It's not just about like, oh, I get to see pictures of the characters now. No. There's also the thing with the medium of how all the frames are like shot and how they're all like laid out in each like page. Not even just the fact that like the art is like, if you just take the art, pull it from the manga and you put it into an anime, like what they kind of did with The Way of the House Husband, that adaptation, even that you can't consider to be a recreation because literally the layout of the panels for The Way of the House Husband can add to the comedic effect of that manga. And in fact, there's a lot of manga that do like play into the fact that it is a manga that has to be laid out in this kind of manga format. There's a whole bunch of them that will have them like be in the box of the manga page itself, but then like some characters or some like cool action shots will like stretch over like a few panels and kind of like break the fourth wall with that. Like that kind of stuff is really cool and the kind of stuff that can only be really conveyed through that medium. I mean, unless you're like literally trying to like show the manga pages on the anime adaptation, which like it has happened, but they usually make it move in interesting ways too as like a meta thing. So it like even with that, like
I genuinely believe that there are 0 lazy animators and production staff in the entire world.
Right.
And blaming production issues on them is unfair.
Okay, I wouldn't say all of them aren't lazy, but you know, to blame what happens with an adaptation on the animators or production staff being lazy is to be ignorant of like the entirety of the industry, right? Sure, there can be cases where someone along the lines of the production staff is lazy, and that causes a whole bunch of fuck-ups with in regards to like how the show ends up. Sure, this can happen. However, if you just shrug your shoulders and say, wow, the animators for this episode are shit, you are just ignorant to like how things work, and it's not necessarily your fault, because this isn't something that a lot of like people like to like openly talk about, because a lot of them don't know what the fuck they're talking about, right? An anime adaptation might look like shit, and it might be because the animation does look like shit, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is the animator's fault. Understand this. There's a difference here, okay? The animator might be doing the best that they can given all the work they're being forced to do across multiple series, sometimes across multiple studios. Not one animator's tied to one studio. A lot of them are freelance animators working for whoever will hire them to work on something, right? And they're like not even getting paid too much in some cases to work on like certain numbers of frames too. And they have to like deliver them within a certain amount of time. And then sometimes, they'll have to do the corrections for those. And they're like doing what they can, but they're not, there's only so much they can do in the end, right? And sometimes it's not even the fault of like the anime studios, like the production staff. It'd be like the fault of like a higher up who like has these like weird things that they want them to force into the production in the end, but they're the ones who are funding the main thing, so they get like the most word on that. Like, these are things that you have to keep in mind. Sure, you can have these cases where like an animator's like work is at fault in like a certain cut for looking like shit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones that caused it to end up that way. They could have done the best that they could given the situation that they were put in. Like, a lot of things could happen.
Lastly, I am not a Sakuga head. My name is not AJ. I know the names and the styles of a few big animation players, but that's
I'm not
it.
a Sakuga head.
I'm just a guy with
not
moderate behind-the-scenes knowledge.
I barely have any fucking this is something I need to work on. Actually, I need to focus more. We need to have like Sakuga Saturdays or some shit, like for some stream memes where like I just focus on finding ways to appreciate certain like awesome cuts of animation or learning about certain Sakuga like animation styles and stuff like that, because I am like insanely dumb when it comes to talking about animation itself as like, the art form itself. I've always been more a person who's really into talking about the stories and the concepts and the themes. Occasionally like the aesthetics, I guess, but like only so much as to like, usually I like the nice colors, or I like the way they styled the lines for this character, or I like how they designed the character. Like, never really like in the sense of how things themselves move in scenes, right? And this is something that I want to like get kind of better with. So I feel like we should like have more streams where I'm trying to like find ways to appreciate that kind of stuff more in some ways. Basically, I'd imagine streams where I go onto something like Sakugaboru, I look up some cuts, and I try to, one, articulate how it makes me feel, why it makes me feel that way, how like I understand like what is moving in that scene, try to grow some kind of understanding of like who is making these cuts and what kind of like styles might have gone into it, right? Like, all these kind of things are like things that I would love to like try to focus on and learn, to try to like educate myself more, to be able to like understand and appreciate that element more. Direction and storytelling.
While I'm not going to review the story of MHA, since I do that in every other video already, I do want to talk about how that story is communicated in animated format. The addition of voice acting, music, and color mean that now the director has to think about new elements when crafting and adapting a scene. This leads us to the topic of direction, the art of designing scenes.
Man, I wish I loved shonen shit enough to like be as passionate as these other YouTubers to like just center my entire YouTube around that fandom, because like that would make my YouTube life probably a lot more easier, and especially with attracting like a lot more people. But I can't. I'm sorry. Most of the shonens and everybody centers like their channel around, I just can't get myself to like think of anything new I could really talk about with it. I'm sorry, I just can't. Like, but these people, I'm jealous of them, because they like have like these entire channels that are just dedicated to dissecting this long-running shonen as it's going on, and they get to like do this for like a very fucking long time because they're long-running shonen, and there's like seems to be no end to stuff that they could like cover with it. There's like so much that they can do with it. So I'm kind of jealous of them in a way.
And this is where the anime loses me a little bit. Throughout much of the first 3 seasons, the anime attempts to match the boarding and framing of the manga panels as closely as possible, identifying itself as a very faithful adaptation. However, this is not really as good of a thing as it might sound. The manga is drawn to be enjoyed and experienced in the manga format, and that doesn't always translate well onto the screen. Think about how, for example, manga is a vertical medium, while modern TV is horizontal. The compositions that worked in one may not work in the other.
Yes, that's very true.
So many key scenes run the risk of just being colored, less detailed, and less well-composed versions of their manga counterparts.
There can be like an entire page dedicated to like one really cool shot, but because it's vertical, you're going to be missing out on some parts of it when it goes to TV and it's horizontal, right? So like you gotta hope that they don't put like too much stuff that's really cool at the top and bottom parts. But sometimes they take up the whole page and they do it for a reason. So they're putting stuff in the top and bottom. So
also limits directional creativity. I think the best way to illustrate what I mean is to look at an example of good direction. When Deku goes to meet Night Eye, the anime includes this shot, completely original, which shows how imposing and anal Night Eye is while being genuinely fun and interesting to look at to try and figure out how the various reflections work. And while these moments do pop up, they are the exception. Most of the time, the anime is oriented by the manga panels, and so creative shots like these don't appear all that often. Most of the time, most shots are just an inferior version of the manga counterparts, and that just is not very enjoyable, especially if you have read the manga. However, good direction does exist, and as it shows up, it gives us glimpses of some.
This reminds me, this used to be a part of Digibro's channel, which Digibro now no longer goes by Digibro. What is their name now? Beatrice the Golden Witch or something? So they had made a video a while ago that I thought was really cool. But this was before I watched K-On!, but it was about K-On! And how the direction of K-On!, not only did it have like really nice things, like just the direction of it compared to how the original like 4 like manga direction was. It was like such a huge difference, and they added so much to it as a result that like the anime feels like it's the superior version just purely as a result of the fucking really nice direction of it.
Pretty much every scene between the kids is given a lighthearted and casual mood that elevates them beyond the manga, which really helps to make you care for these little idiots. And every moment of triumph is given space, fanfare, and excitement that really gets the blood flowing. However, one area where this bites the anime in the ass is any story segment that is more depressing or dark. Victories, after all, only feel good if there was darkness that had to be overcome, and the anime seems to willingly mellow out that darkness in order to appeal to a younger demographic, potentially and probably because of its time slot. Characters like All For One and Overall have some of the more disturbing features neutered and decreased, and while censorship isn't everywhere, it pops up, understandably.
Like what?
But maybe the biggest issue.
Name the example, you coward. He like got to the first step where he's like, yeah, was it One For All or whatever? The villain guy there, they muted his like darker side. Explain that. Just explain that, please. I would love to, because I don't have any context. Just explain that.
Passionate about this project, and I think they probably put some thought into it.
Was that me or them?
I routinely got
I think that was the video.
Music. At the end of season 2, the summer exams, which were all simultaneous in the manga, are instead made to happen in a set order. This change is a godsend, and maybe one of the best things the anime has ever done, because it turns a confusing, incoherent mess that switches between 10 locations constantly into a streamlined, easily digestible sequence of battles. This change ends up being unambiguously to the series' benefit.
I mean, but you can do it the other way too still. Like, Dragon Ball does this constantly, and especially with the Dragon Ball Super like Tournament of Power arc, although I guess if you didn't like that arc, then you would say that you're glad My Hero did this change. But you could do both of these things. Like, these are things that you can do. Like Dragon Ball did it.
The second example is...
And it constantly does it with like how it tells like stories of events that are happening. Like, that's why Dragon Ball's like timeline stuff, where, you know, a character will say only 5 minutes until I blow up the world or whatever. And then like 9 episodes later, only 3 minutes left. Like, I mean, this is why we're just telling the story of characters simultaneously, but we're not like, we don't have to like literally have it happen at the same time. We can just show it side by side and then just give you a frame of reference of how much time actually passed to show you that, hey, this is happening at the same time. It might seem like it's being dragged out and long because the character set's 5 seconds, and you go back and they say now there's 3 seconds left, even though like 3 minutes of dialogue passed. Maybe it was to tell you that was the thing happening at the same time. You know, that kind of thing. Pretty good video. Even though some things I wanted way more examples on. Some things he like said and like got close to starting to show the example and then went to the next scene. It's probably in the case of like he's assuming this is made for people who are like up to date and currently like consume all aspects of My Hero Academia. But really, this kind of video seems like it'd be good for somebody who has not at all like consumed the My Hero anime adaptation at all, or like maybe even ideally this would be for somebody who read the manga and hasn't watched the anime yet, but you could also just make it for anybody who is maybe interested in getting into My Hero Academia, but they're not sure whether they should go with the anime or maybe the manga, or if the anime is even worth it at all, or if the show is even compatible for them. At the very least, like, don't assume that if you say like this show likes to mute certain dark things, like this character, it like mutes a lot of his dark stuff. Like what? Just tell me like what. You already said at the beginning of the video with like a warning message that it's going to have spoilers. So you can spoil that stuff. Like you've already told me you're going to have spoilers. You can spoil that. You don't have to be vague about that. You can just tell me the thing that they mute, or like the fucked up thing. Like you can do that. You can do that. You've already told us the warning. So you don't have to worry about that. So I wish he went into more detail about that kind of thing. There was other times where that kind of happened, but that was like the one that really stood out to me, where we're just like so close to like giving you that example and then not. But he did pretty good in other cases of like explaining his thoughts and giving examples of those and how those look. Like the forest comparison between the movie and how it, I just had it on screen. The comparison of how the forest looked in the movie compared to how it looked in the anime, like that's a really good example that you can show. You know, like
sometime and focus specifically on the backgrounds.
Look at the background, and then look at the anime background.
And watch the TV.
And I mean, that just goes to show you like the different qualities between movies and shows, right? This is just kind of, they have more time, better budget to work with. But the main thing is probably just that they have more time because they're expected to make something of higher quality. That's usually what that means. Like, but that's a really good example. And I wish like he just got into detail about like that character in that segment more. But overall, the video's pretty good. Pretty good video.